Playing the intro.
Downs, the voice of Master Chief.
Starting my recording.
17. Welcome to Quality Time, the KO Koala Entertainment Podcast. Anthony and Skylar will take it from here. Master Chief, out.
Welcome to Quality Time, the KO Koala Entertainment Podcast. My name is Anthony Nicolosi.
Oh, my name's Skylar Sokol. That was a nice, diminished chord, maybe? I don't know. I don't know what interval that was, but it was nice.
And today, we are talking about interactive experiences versus video games. Let me tell you, Skylar.
Yes, tell me.
Once again, the man himself, Will Waltz, has somehow got his hands in this mess. You know, he's responsible for this because he tweeted at me about a week ago, and he asks, people of the internet, it's time that we come up with another word for video games, games/gaming, for interactive experiences that are more like art/story/interactive therapy, but not really games like a Fall Guys, Rocket League, Halo. You know what I mean? And he tags me and he says, gonna tag you here. He wants to see if we can crack the code, Skylar,
all right,
on this episode of the podcast.
I think we're up for the challenge.
And now this is an interesting one, right? Like for I know you've got a little bit of an intro for all the listeners. I want to say these kinds of interactive experiences also include things, for me at least personally, augmented reality. An augmented reality.
Starting with the unpopular opinion before the intro? Come on, man.
Okay, fair. All right, let's go into the intro. Right. Let's get our foundation set.
Anthony's
so
trying to give opinions that I disagree with, so I have to read the intro. I can't disagree with them before I read the intro.
Yeah, he has to agree with them.
Yeah, because I have to read the intro. All right. This intro comes from a rare guest on our podcast, but actually one of the very first books Anthony and I both read on game design and games, which is A Theory of Fun for Game Design by Raph Koster. Looks like this.
Very good book.
He has
another one of those strongly recommend books.
Absolutely. Yeah, it's a great book. And it's written so easy to read. Probably one of the most easy to read books that we recommend. Like I know we say Book of Lenses is easy to read. This one's I would say even easier.
Yeah, it's shorter too.
So he says, looking up game in the dictionary isn't that helpful. Once you leave out all the definitions referring to hunting, they wander all over the place. Pastimes or amusements are lumped in with contests. Interestingly, none of the definitions tend to assume that fun is a requirement. Amusement or entertainment at best is required. Those few academics who have tried to define game has offered up everything from Roger Kalos Kelwa, activity which is voluntary, uncertain, unproductive, governed by rules, make-believe, to Johann Huizinga's free activity outside ordinary life, to Jesper Juhl's more contemporary take, a game is a rule-based, formal system with a variable and a quantifiable outcome where different outcomes are assigned different values. The player
I like that one, by the way.
Wait, we're not done yet.
Yeah,
the player exerts effort in order to influence the outcome. The player feels attached to the outcome, and the consequences of the activity are optional and negotiable.
Okay.
Now, a few other highlights. We've got some game designers' definitions. We've got Chris Crawford, a game designer and theorist, who says, games are a subset of entertainment limited to conflicts in which players work to foil each other's goals. Sid Meier says that games are a series of meaningful choices. Ernest Adams and Andrew Rollings, a game designer, say one or more casually linked series of challenge in a simulated environment. So a lot of these definitions, right, involve choices and choice. That's a very important aspect here. The last definition we have is Katie Salen and Eric Zimmerman from their book Rules of Play, that a game is a system in which players engage in an artificial conflict defined by rules that results in a quantifiable outcome. Now, this kind of gets crazy already, right? I think the most quintessential art game, the game that inspired, the game that was the first purest form art game that had essentially nothing to offer but its art is Dear Esther. Dear Esther is the first walking sim. You literally just walk around and experience the dialogue and the narrative. There's no other mechanics really. You're just walking. Now, do you have meaningful choices in that game? I don't think so.
I don't think so.
Right?
Either.
So we're already violating like the core of these definitions just from that. So,
but I think that, from my perspective, that's kind of what Will and the conversation here is about.
Exactly.
Right?
No, and I agree completely. I think this is only further justifying what Will says, that there is a need to distinguish here because these experiences are not what we would consider games.
Right. No, I agree. That last definition that you used, I can't remember the name of the two designers. I felt like that was probably the one that
The artificial conflict one?
Artificial conflict. It's a system designed with an artificial conflict set of rules, boundaries, limitations that you can, and such mechanics that you can leverage to, relieve the conflict, to solve the conflict, whatever.
You just engage in an artificial conflict defined by rules that results in a quantifiable outcome.
So that one sounds like a game to me. And then when you talk about Dear Esther, that doesn't match that definition. Right?
Yeah. So like that, Dear Esther is more of just a narrative experience that you are interacting with in a more direct way than like a movie. Then you interact with a narrative experience in a movie, right? Like that's what distinguishes it from like film media, at least, right?
Yeah, and what throws it in the category of games. Now, why the interactivity is the thing that differentiates it from a movie. You agree?
Right. Yes, the fact that you're walking, that you're hitting, that some action you are taking is influencing something that is occurring in the game, regardless of how meaningless or small that thing is.
Yeah. So I think Dear Esther is a great example. I totally agree with this. I think another useful thing will be like, how far does this go? Because the example that Will actually uses in a conversation on Twitter in this thread was he even thought 12 minutes fall into this.
Right. And that's really interesting because that game has a ton of choices that you're making constantly throughout the game. Literally all that game is trying to figure out the correct series of choices to solve the artificial conflict that exists in the game, right?
Well, and from Will's perspective, he says it has game elements. From his opinion, is it has game elements, but it's just interactivity elements in a temporal mystery that the player moves forward from his perspective.
And I guess according to our designers we just overviewed, they would consider that a game then. But it seems like Will would like to distinguish even that.
Right. So from my perspective, 12 minutes falls under as a game. There's puzzle elements in it, right?
I think we get more muddy.
What Will's getting at. I can see where he's getting at, but like Dear Esther's more what I'm thinking of when we're thinking of these interactive experiences.
Now, if we meet in the middle, I think we end up around the Stanley Parable, and that's a really interesting one to discuss because the Stanley Parable is literally a game about choices, a game about deciding what you do and having different things happen based on what you do, but generally all you're doing is walking, and it's just where you walk that changes what happens. But you are making meaningful choices in that game, 100%. So is that this? Like, I don't know. I think that like the interactivity is the thing that makes the Stanley Parable so engaging, and without it, it would not be the experience that it is. So the interactivity being so important makes me feel like I would call it a game, but maybe that's just because that definition is so overloaded, right? But I don't know where we draw the line. That's what's really hard. Like, how do we draw the line?
To be clear, the influence your interaction in the game, in the environment, in the experience has on the experience itself is what you find interesting of Stanley Parable. Meaning, like, it's not that you said interactivity, but it's more of like the consequences of your interactivity that is interesting.
Well, I think that's all games.
I know, but like if there are consequences to your interactivity, that's I think like the differentiator of like, is this does that still that's a thing to consider in classifying. Is that if your actions have consequences on the experience, does that make it a game?
I guess you have to define what consequences are, right? In Dear Esther, technically you walking over the trigger points that cause the dialogue to happen are your interactivity having consequences, right? But like,
does it have an influence on the experience? Like the story goes a different way, or
it's not that the
anything?
story goes a different way, but if you don't walk, the story doesn't happen.
Isn't that same with Dear Esther though?
That's what I'm saying in Dear Esther. I'm talking about Dear Esther now. And saying that
okay.
now I'm even thinking that it's hard to separate that one because your actions do still have a direct influence on the experience. So that clearly is not a viable definition here, at least wouldn't be for Will, because that includes too much, just saying that our interactivity has direct consequences in the experience.
Right. Okay. Well, so then I think what we're coming away with this is that being able to, the fact that your interaction with the experience may influence the experience somehow is not necessarily kicking it out of this category.
Right. We, at least if we're trying to, abide by what Will is trying to say and be pure to that, I agree. I think that clearly that's not what he has in mind. And since our goal of the podcast is to solve Will's tweets, we gotta do it. Yeah, no, we gotta. It's true. So like in my mind, right, maybe there is a distinction between what is interactive and what is a game. And I think that's what Will's trying to say when he talks about 12 minutes, right? That he feels like although 12 minutes is interactive, somehow it's still not a game. So where is that line? Like how can something be interactive but not a game, and when does it become a game? One easy argument is just to say like when something is multiplayer, like when you are competing against someone, that is like always a game. And I think that's a strong start. Right? Like,
yeah.
I think we could possibly agree that competitive game, like interaction, is a game.
Mm-hmm.
Right?
Yeah, but if we want to have a good definition, something to work on, what are the elements that make that true? Is it
right
to the definition of those last designers? It's a system with conflict that you have mechanics to engage with engage with the conflict.
Yeah.
You have mechanics available.
But that
to
doesn't
you
that but that definition applies to the Stanley Parable too. So that's an issue, right? So like, but like, just like instinctually, right? I can name games that I would more classify as these art experiences than I would games, right? Like What Remains of Edith Finch comes to mind. Even Journey comes to mind, even though Journey has a lot of game elements. Like you're jumping, you're flying around, you're finding secrets, you're collecting things, but still. And maybe this might be something that we're getting at here. Maybe if the intention of the experience is more narrative than mechanical.
But does that just not make it a genre?
It could, and maybe that's the conclusion, maybe, that these are just a genre within games.
Right.
But I think that is a difference that these experiences have, right? That...
Mm-hmm.
Like What Remains of Edith Finch, the goal of it is to give you this narrative experience, not to like care that much about the mechanics, although the mechanics totally play into that narrative experience. Same with Journey, same with all of these games, right? Like Journey without the narrative is nothing. It's not fun. It's not interesting, right? Whereas, Halo without the narrative, I think people would still find entertaining.
Mm-hmm. Josh is in chat, and he makes the point that if the only interaction that you have in these games or in these experiences is to do it or not, does that really count as a game? Are choose your own adventure novels then games?
Right. I think to some degree I would say yes. Now maybe with this new definition I just proposed, where the intention is more narrative than mechanical, choose your own adventure novels would definitely fall under the category of the intention being more narrative than mechanical, for sure, but they are a series of meaningful choices leading to a quantifiable outcome, right?
Mm-hmm.
So that's hard.
Now, let me circle back to what I said at the beginning of the podcast.
Yeah, let's talk about that.
Kind of change this a little bit, because when I was initially thinking about this topic, I was thinking more of things that maybe didn't get any more complex mechanically than a Dear Esther. Okay, like that was the most complex from an interactivity perspective that things would get in this category in my head, and then you would get to things like an augmented reality art museum would also fall under these interactive experiences, because you need to interact, you need to engage and interact and at least pass through, sort of like a walking simulator. You need to like go through it to be able to experience it. Otherwise, like, you don't experience it.
Right. So, I mean, that's pretty limiting. Like, so you'd say that if you're doing anything like Dear Esther, the mechanics, right? Where you walk, and when you walk to specific areas, the story continues, and when you walk to the next area, the story continues, right?
Right.
You don't think anything beyond that falls into this category, or you're not interested in considering anything beyond that in the game space?
Well, I mean, I'm interested in considering it. I just don't. Once you start having anything that's like an, in my opinion, it's not functionally much different than delivering a movie at which you could choose how fast you wanted to go through the movie, right?
I don't
to
know.
a certain extent.
I feel like the fact that you are the immersion, like there's a real amount of immersion in being the character and moving through an environment that is very different from a movie, even if you had control over the pacing.
The better word is maybe like the execution of your flow through the experience, not the experience itself. So yeah, I agree with you. Like, you being the character. Also, I was thinking about it. In my opinion, I used to do this. I don't do this anymore, but I used to just like go into Minecraft Creative, where you don't even have the need to survive. It's just like you're in there. And I would just experience it. I'd walk around and like it'd fucking snow, and I thought that was awesome.
Right.
And then there is
or like building a tower out of blocks, even physically, right? Like, is that a game? Because that's sort of what you were doing, and that, I don't know if I would call that a game. That's more of like one of these like art, like one of these kind of interactive experiences, right?
Mm-hmm. Right.
So what is the difference between like building a tower of blocks or just walking around Minecraft and looking around and, playing survival in Minecraft?
Yeah, it's a little hard. I want to say that building blocks, even in real life, is a game. You
could make it a game if you wanted to, but I don't know if it has to be a game, right? And that's even more complicated, right? Like, depending on how you interpret these things, they could be a game for one person and not a game for another,
Yes, so does the novelty and the definition come down to your perspective of
the activity,
of the experience?
Yeah, I think very likely yes, right? Like, if I go to an art museum, right, and my goal being there is to, experience as much art as possible as fast as possible, and then be able to name every painting I saw, even though I went through it fast. Suddenly that art museum experience is a game, even though technically I'm using the same exact control scheme that you were to just walk through and like appreciate the art, right?
Right. Yep.
Where's Will when we need him to
I mean, in my head, the notion comes when you just described that, like, the thing that feels like it's differentiating the two is you're creating these goals, and you're creating some amount of constraint to the goals by giving yourself like this notion of a time limit, or like trying to do it as fast as you can. It feels like I don't know, for me at least, I don't know if this is true. I'm thinking like if you had a walking sim with time sensitive things, I don't know if you've ever played one like that. Like,
Stanley Parable has that.
So yeah, like that would make it feel more like a game to me. Like, I have to,
like, there's a failure condition.
Yeah, probably because of that, because there's a failure condition.
Yeah, that's interesting. And I think things with failure conditions definitely move towards games rather quickly. But then, I mean, and we already said like 12 minutes has a million failure conditions. So like that one's really hard to justify there. But Ashley actually brings up an interesting point in the chat with scavenger hunts, because that's another thing that like I could see easily, based on your perspective, not really being a game, just being like something you experience, but you're not really doing a game necessarily, right?
Yeah, it kind of comes down to how you can just experience for the sake of experiencing a chord maze in a similar way, right? Like, you're just like experiencing it.
Right, and you don't really care about solving it necessarily.
And that's where it like comes down to like failure condition, the absence of a failure condition is I guess I think another characteristic of what would differentiate between experiencing the maze and just
Yeah,
playing the
I think
maze.
a failure condition may be like a quantifiable goal, which also sort of implies a failure condition, right? Like if my goal, even in Dear Esther, right, is to get to the end as fast as possible, or maybe even get to the end, suddenly it becomes more gamey than if I'm just there to see what happens.
I think, maybe the way of saying it then, because if you choose, like we said, it's impossible. You can make anything a game. I'm sure there's maybe some stretch of the imagination where somebody could figure out how to define a story game as a movie or some fucking shit.
Right,
Like,
totally.
depending on parameters, right?
Semantics are very malleable.
But I think that if the system is designed to enforce a failure condition, that seems to be one thing that's definitely putting things in the games category.
Yeah, and Josh in chat says you can also make anything a game by adding some sort of goal, and I agree. I think that's another characteristic that sort of pushes things towards the game category. These failure conditions, these goals, and Majin in chat also says maybe something that provides a challenge. What I think is also is reasonable, but then like the building blocks example, it's a challenge to keep your tower up, but the second your goal is like building the tallest tower possible, you've made it into a game, right? So maybe that is a good one.
But making it as goal is a thing, but I mean your goal can be to go through the whole museum and it doesn't make it a game.
But
I think
maybe
it's
a
like
challenging goal.
Yeah, maybe, but like it's still I feel like the combination of a goal with a failure condition is what makes it the game. Because if your goal is to build the biggest thing as the biggest whatever you said tower of blocks possible, the failure condition is anything not the biggest tower possible.
No, absolutely.
Possible.
Absolutely.
The presence of a system that's designed with a failure condition in addition to goals definitely makes something a game in my head.
I think so too, but I feel like that may be too limiting because I feel like we could come up with games that don't have failure conditions or don't need them.
Would you say 12 minutes has macro failure conditions? Like, can you, or does it just are they micro in that they reset your existing little puzzle?
I mean, they reset you to the beginning, but that's absolutely a failure condition because it spends your time, right?
Uh-huh.
Right? Like, what's more, what is a failure condition if not just something that makes you do something again and spends time?
If I would say, now I'm thinking Hades.
Okay.
In the event, Hades, you fail and you reset.
Yep.
But you get new story information when you do, right? The fact that even though you on the micro reset, on the macro you still kind of move forward because you get more info on the story.
Right. What are you saying with that?
Meaning that 12, I think the thing about 12 minutes that...
I mean, that's the same way in 12 minutes. It has the same
You
thing.
get more about the story next time you go through.
Well, no, but you can then apply the new things you learned previously to the next run through.
Okay.
You have more knowledge, and then you can affect the events differently.
I don't know. From that perspective, I feel like that's a soft failure condition. I don't know. Yeah.
I mean, then
anyway,
what's a hard failure condition then? Like, I'm not sure. I'm following.
You would it's kind of more like maybe a game with checkpoints where you would instead you would progress all the way back to a previous thing without obtaining anything new on the next subsequent run.
So here's what you're making me think of, and I don't think this was your intention, but this actually I think is good. So what if a game is anything that is something that is like an interactive experience but has a mastery path? Right?
Mastery path is an important
because that's sort of what we're talking about, right? Even in these hard failure conditions, because there are games that absolutely have hard failure conditions, right? Like roguelikes, where you literally just start at the beginning with nothing, but there's still a game, and that's because every time you play, you get better at it. You know what I mean? So maybe a mastery path or just some way to get better at what you're doing is part of being a game. Because, I mean, there are things that are skills that are not games, but maybe that is another building block of what could define a game versus one of these interactive experiences. Because you definitely don't have a mastery path really for walking through an art museum.
No, you don't. And in Theory of Fun, Raph Koster kind of comes to the conclusion, I think in that chapter, or ends it by saying that games are fundamentally teachers, right?
Mhm.
Games, in his opinion, games teach you how to get better at something, and a good game does a good job of teaching you, i.e., a mastery path, like, right? So, and he subsequently will go on to talk about mastery path in the book and how important they are and whatever. I agree. I feel like this is sort of like adding to my definition of game. If you have a failure condition, it's like a characteristics, a challenging goal, but I think the challenging goal is kind of almost maybe a little synonymous with a mastery path, right?
I agree. Well, and also sort of a failure condition is too, because it's hard to
Right.
get better, need to get better at something if there's no way not to be perfect
You-
at it from the beginning, right?
You need feedback on your shortcoming.
Right. Like,
towards the
unless
goal.
your goal with Dear Esther is finishing it as fast as possible, you're not really able to improve at that game.
Right.
So,
Right.
right. So, and maybe that's what really that seems like pretty solid in my mind. That is a big aspect, that you need to be able to get better at it and have some quantifiable goal.
Mm-hmm.
Because otherwise it's just a skill, right? And then it's not a game either. You can't just have a mastery path. You need to have some goal or like reason to be doing it.
And more specifically, I think, again, to protect against the myriad of ways people could perceive an experience and choose to perceive an experience, I think it's more like when the game as a system is designed to push a mastery path is when it's a game. Like
But
the Dear Esther-
versus an interactive artistic experience or whatever.
versus like the example you had of Dear Esther, it's like, yeah, a person could choose to make it a thing where they have to beat it as fast as possible, but the game's not like, it doesn't have any kind of systematic influence there. Like, there's no timer or whatever.
Right. Well, and I think
right?
What Remains of Edith Finch and even Journey have definite aspects that fall into that category as well. And I think I would like those to be able to consider these to be considered as these artistic experiences as well, since I think they are those, even though they have gamey elements.
Do you think Journey doesn't have a mastery path?
I think it does, but it doesn't matter.
Okay. So maybe bridges that
Right.
divide right there.
Right. I think the fact that it has a mastery path can be fun, and it adds to the fun of it, but the core experience and the intent of the experience is not that.
Okay.
Right? And I think intent matters a lot, like you're saying. It has to be designed with the mastery path in mind as one of the core aspects of the game. Yeah, I like that.
Right.
Now I'm thinking one thing we promised we'd come up with, and we're coming up on the end here, is we have to come up with a name. So
yeah, the question I pitched to you at work today, that I pitched to a few people at work too, was like, imagine that you're ahead of Pixar, okay, and you're told the next thing we're working on is one of these interactive experiences, not a movie. We're doing
and not a
interactive
game.
experience. Huh?
Not a movie and not a game. We're doing this
Not a
thing
movie,
that's
it's not a
in
game.
between.
It's this interactive experience.
Yes.
Has no mastery path,
Yeah.
It's gonna be on rails walking simulator,
Right.
whatever.
Or
right?
even
be
like a simulator
low.
where you're moving on rails and you can just look around freely. Like that could
Right.
even be this, right?
Like
could
Song
totally
of
see-
Iron, but you didn't have to fight anybody.
Well, yeah, or like you're on like a roller coaster, right? But not an actual roller coaster. You're like in a cart, right? Just moving down a path, and you can just look around and experience what's going on, and you have power over where you're looking. Yes, Pokemon Snap, but no picture taking, as Josh
Yeah.
says. Exactly. So what do we call that? What
Yeah, and
snappy?
they tell you you need to not only come up with a name, but you need to come up with a name that we can communicate to the public, right?
Right.
That like rolls off the tongue good, that people will actually use when talking about this thing. And I thought of a lot of different things. I'm curious as to like any that came to your mind when you're thinking of this?
Well, so my heart goes immediately to like we need to come up with some catchy acronym so that for the people who care, you can get the true meaning across by by knowing what the acronym means. But for the people who don't, it's just something that sounds catchy. You know what I mean?
have one.
You have one?
have
Okay,
one.
because I haven't thought of one yet. But if you have one, I would love to hear it.
Well, let me give you the worst answer first.
Okay,
since you went to acronym, okay?
Okay,
Since you immediately went there. So I was thinking that in these kinds of experiences, the experience sort of really just like echoes off of you. Okay.
Okay.
Like the experience remains like basically itself with this like slight fluctuation of your interactivity in these particular examples.
Uh-huh.
And so for that reason, I was like, well, what if you called this kind of a thing an echo, right? Or an interactive echo, right? That was one thing I said. And then, so what would that be? You don't say interactive echo. That's fucking way too long. Echo is fine, but the problem with echo is that it doesn't have a explicit like tie to this. I think it's sort of kind of the same.
I see why you said this is the worst one, just for the record.
Yeah, it's my least favorite of. I mean, I had way more, but I'm putting it down to 2. So the one I like the most and got the most positive feedback for work is IX, interactive experience. IX.
And okay, but X
now
to make it sexy, right?
So here's the problem with IX in a way, and I think it's just generally with these notions of experiences. What's the verb associated with these? You don't play an IX. You
experience an IX, right?
You experience an IX, but experience is too long.
And it's in the word already, yeah.
So I thought a lot about this. Some people at work, shout out to Cooper. If he ever listens to this episode, I think he will. He said he was really interested. He had a couple of ideas. One funny one. He says, well, if this is like a game but a movie, you could call it a groovy. And you could say you grooved it.
You groove it?
He's going to be embarrassed I even said that one.
I like it. That's amazing.
He said, another one that was interesting that he said was you could burn an IX. Because from his perspective, you could maybe say that after you experience an IX the first time, similar to a movie, you'll never have that same experience of the initial one again. And you could say you burned it. I don't think it's the right verb here, but
it's an interesting perspective for sure. Yeah. The only thing I don't like about IX is that it's not pronounceable in a nice way. Like, I'm not going to say Ix. So like, that would be
say IX,
right?
Like
exactly.
an IEX.
And that would be that's an interesting one from Josh, that you could absorb an IX. That's nice.
I absorbed an IX this weekend. This is the one I ended up with. I thought of others like, could you say that you led an IX because you do kind of drive it forward?
I see what you're saying.
Could you say that you like somehow consumed an IX because you do?
I like consume a lot.
Yeah, I think it hits. Maybe it's just me. It hits kind of too foodie, but the one I think I ended up with that I liked the most was walk. I walk an IX because while you do especially if you're doing like an augmented reality museum, you literally maybe walk. In these other experiences, when they're rails, walking sort of still holds as something that you sort of kind of progress. You push forward.
Yeah,
right?
You could say like you travel it.
I traveled an IX.
Right.
I mean, you could maybe it would make sense if you were talking about a specific one that like kind of hit that, right? Like,
well, I just mean like you travel through it, right? Similar to walk, but like walk also wouldn't necessarily apply to all of them, right?
Walking it though, can be used like I know there's a word here, but my vocabulary fails me. But like. Walk implies just the progressing it, right? Like I walk the of course in a walking simulator you literally walk it, but like I walk the script through is like something I say when I'm talking with somebody about like a script that I just need to like
I understand.
I walk the script.
It's not bad.
Yeah.
But
it's not bad.
I think if
I had to go up tomorrow, of all of the things I thought, I would probably say walking an IX, but it also seems like the verb especially could use something. Participated margins in there.
I'm in on absorb. I think absorb's my favorite so far.
Come to the theaters and absorb an IX.
Yeah,
it could be.
I honestly don't like IX. My only problem with it, and I don't have an alternative, is that it's not like pronouncing it isn't that fun. I wish that it was like
plural is a little tough.
Yeah, also plural is hard, but I wish that it was like an acronym that I could say, like scuba or whatever. Right, that would be the best. But I don't know what that is. But maybe someone who listens to the podcast can send us one that they come up with that's like that, because I think that would be cool. Some like 3-letter or 4-letter acronym that like has, stands for something interactive experience, but then it's pronounceable.
Yeah, I think the better think to focus on is 3 syllables. I think is the main thing. It can be 3 letters, but 3 syllables max. I mean,
You mean
would
it
be
when you
good.
pronounce the acronym?
When you pronounce the acronym or the word, if somebody thinks of
Yeah,
a word,
yeah. I agree. I think you want it to
3
be short.
syllables max.
All right. Cool.
Yeah, and interestingly, we also had a conversation around like, would acronyms even work? And we were talking about there's not a lot of acronyms in the public conscious, but there are a few, like radar and laser are actually both.
Well, I said
acronyms.
scuba. That's why I said scuba, dog.
Is scuba an acronym?
Uh-huh.
Let's see, scuba. Interestingly, all 3 of them have nice vowel play.
Yep.
And I do, yeah. That's a weakness of IX. iExpo sounds like a fucking.
I like what Josh says: immersive sensory experience, an ISE or an ICE. I like that.
Yeah, I like that one too. Immersive.
I don't know if you pronounce it an ICE or an eyes.
I would say ice.
I think
Ice.
ICE is cooler. It's
Or
feels
icy.
That's gross. Don't say that ever again.
You want to come watch?
You want to come watch an ICE with me?
I walked in ice.
That's kind of catchy.
I mean, I could totally see it catching. This is weird. I mean, I was thinking about like movies, a short form of absorbed in ice.
Ooh, I like that.
Maybe
that flows nice for me.
Consumed in ice.
Yeah, that's a nice one. That's a nice suggestion, Josh.
Yeah, I like ice too. You know what? When they did movies, you have film, which didn't land. It's same problem as Echo. It doesn't only mean film. And then you have motion picture, but that's too long. So we do movie. You know, something that moving photos movie. Yeah.
Right.
And it enters the public consciousness. Again, I do think though, I don't know what you think, maybe immersive sensory experience is the other reason why immersive sensory experience actually is cool, Josh, is I'm thinking of like these virtual reality haptic feedback suits kind of experiences. And I think they'd fall under a nice, you know?
I like those things you go to at the arcades that are like the big boxes that move around while you like ride the roller coaster or whatever, and they're just there for you to experience that.
Yeah.
That's like sort of the same thing.
That's not a game.
Right.
That's not a
But
game.
it is an immersive sensory experience. Nice.
It is nice.
Love it. All right. We got a patron question. Let's get to it.
Let's do it.
We got a few to rattle off first, I think, because we're required to by law. I'm gonna give you them quick. I don't even know if we'll alternate answering them, okay? And you don't have no explanation necessary. Only single word answer required. All right.
Okay.
All right.
Okay.
Question 1. Where is it? What would win in a fight? A grilled cheese sandwich or a taco?
I liked actually I got your potatoes answer here, where he said taco if it's a street fight, but in a clean fight, grilled cheese.
Perfect. I love it. All right. Question for me. Who would win in a fight, Goku or One Punch Man? I say One Punch Man.
Yeah, it's not true. Goku would shit on him, but it's okay.
Your turn. This is a good one for you, and by good one I mean everyone already knows what you're gonna say. Who would win in a fight, Master Chief or Samus?
To be fair, I don't know Samus's capabilities, and for that reason, I'm saying Master Chief.
Okay, and then Toby says, since you said Chief, you're sexist, so that's rough for you.
Yeah, he already had it there already.
Ninja Turtle versus Dora the Explorer for me. I think from a physical perspective, the Ninja Turtles win, but if it's like a mental battle, Dora definitely wins.
Dora has that
She's much
fucking
craftier. She's way craftier than fucking
Swiper,
Ninja
dude?
Turtles. Yeah, Ninja Turtles are so dumb. Like,
I mean, Donatello's pretty good, but
Right.
the other ones are always, too much testosterone.
Pizza. Dora versus Kratos. Oh, okay, we're not answering.
Dora
that.
versus Kratos. Yeah.
Same shit. I mean, it's hard for. I don't know if many
Dora's
people
gonna
can
have her
beat
handful
Kratos.
on that one.
Yeah. Okay. That's it. And the last one from Toby, just for you. Who would have the best OnlyFans, Kermit the Frog or Master Chief?
Probably Kermit, to be honest with you. Like,
He has like a niche that Master Chief can't fill.
yeah,
All right.
they're both green turtles.
And now our real
That would
question.
be really adding a lot to the Patreon. If you want to become a Patreon and talk with Toby,
Please, someone needs to.
Please
He needs
consider
someone
it.
to talk
go to
to.
our website.
Okay.
Okay.
All right. So Evan's question for the day. Do you want to read it? Do you have it up?
Did you have a game experience that you were disappointed with, especially with a game you were excited for?
Now,
I'll let you start.
let's see. Well, I know you have some answers to this.
Yeah.
So why don't you start so I can think?
Dora has an infinite space backpack with random shit and a pet monkey for muscle.
It's true. It's true.
That's what
Josh is
just
right.
said in
And
chat.
she's bilingual. Like, come on, man.
Yeah, she has that communication superiority. Very important in a battle.
Yes, Evan, you can live add an asterisk to your question.
For
Is
those
it
of you
gonna
who
be
are
not
listening on
Halo?
audio, for those of you who are listening on audio, the people we have been interacting with all through this episode are people in chat. We stream these episodes live every Monday at 8:30 p.m. Eastern on Twitch. So if you want to come hang out and maybe get called out, you know where to be.
Feel free to join. All right, let's get your answer. Evan just said he doesn't want us to shit on developers. Don't worry, Evan. I would shit on developers if I wanted to, and I don't usually, so unless they really deserve it.
There will be a day when on Twitter people will shit on Skylar for shitting on things.
Yes, and that will be my favorite day ever.
I have seen the game dev community will harp on him. I also I am of the notion that with the challenges we've faced on game developer, I feel like I understand their struggles more, and it's harder to criticize. Anyway, back to the question.
Yeah, give us your
definitely Halo 5. That's not even close by far. I literally got like 6 people 10 plus years older than me to buy Xboxes from how hyped I made them about Halo 5. And to say the hype was through the roof is an understatement. And yeah, like the Halo 5 and specifically the Halo 5 story, I would just say that if you played it, you'd be like, it's fine. You know, it's not the worst thing I've ever played by any means, but it's not great. But from the hype and the expectations and where the story was, it was like it was the worst thing ever at the time, you know. And it took me a solid year and a half to really get over it, if I'm honest. So that's mine.
I guess the one I can only really think of one thing. I'm sure there are more, but the only one that's really coming to my mind is BioShock 2.
Yeah, it's interesting because you always say BioShock 1's your favorite, Infinite's your favorite.
Yeah. I don't get that hype for games. I don't have like this hype drive like Anthony does, which means that I'm much less often like I don't really get disappointed by games because I don't usually go in with very many expectations. But BioShock 2 I went in with a lot of expectations because, you know, BioShock 1 was like literally the game that got me into PC gaming. So, and I don't know, it just never hooked me. Like
this
I
is
played
why
it.
He doesn't get expectations. He was burned.
I didn't even finish it. Like I didn't even play that much of it. I just like tuned out so fast. I just churned from that game. It just did not grab me like BioShock 1 did, and BioShock Infinite did too. Like grabbed me so hard there was no way I couldn't finish it. BioShock 2 or BioShock Infinite is one of the only games that maybe the only game that's over 8 hours long that I've played twice. I think the only game in existence. Right? So like I don't know, but BioShock 2 I never even finished. It just did not make me feel the same things. It did not hook me in the same way narratively or mechanically. So there you go.
Yeah.
And now hopefully next time we do our favorite games podcast, you and I can both have a game with Infinite in the title as our favorite game.
Yeah, man, I'm really pulling for 343 closing out Infinite. Yeah, we'll see. There's been some Halo community getting mad about no co-op campaign, which I mean is understandable given the history this series has, but we were talking about it. We should do Will said that he'd like to come on sometime. Will, the person we've been talking about this whole time.
Ex-Halo or current 343
current 343 animator, lead animator. Hopefully I didn't like diminish his title there. He
lead director of all animation, god of animation at 343
industry. And anyway, he said he'd be he'd love to come on after Infinite releases. It's a stressful time right now for him.
Amazing.
Undoubtedly, that would be really cool to talk about.
If people want to hear that podcast, where can they find us?
If you want to find us, you can go to koalaentertainment.com. There you have links to all of our social media. Most importantly, our Discord, where if you join, you can play the Agora Research Idle game. It's an idle game that as you level up, you enter into giveaways. You unlock lore secrets for our upcoming game for PC and Xbox called Agora, single-player physics FPS. You can also, that is the best place to get news about Agora as we progress towards launch and talk to us devs. In addition, you can get links to all our social media there, Twitter, Instagram, blah, blah, blah. We do giveaways all the time on Instagram and Discord. So at least bare minimum, jump into those. We have our Patreon links for those of you who would so choose to support us. I want to say it's like 18% of all indie studios who released a game on Steam in 2018 survived their first game launch. The numbers are against us. So alternate revenue streams help out a lot. If anything, for the Patreon, the patrons are making a huge dent in our monthly costs.
Yeah.
We recently crossed our $100 a month goal, which really helps like to just cover, random, all the services and software tools that we use to do KO Koala every month. So it's super helpful. If you'd like to help support us, you get a fuck ton of perks. You get free stickers, free merch, depending on your tier, access to the realm, all kinds of good stuff. So join in, you get behind the scenes content. That's it's already, they've gotten a little bit, and that is going to continue picking up as we get closer to launch. Thank you again to all our patrons. For those who all would consider supporting us, to get ready, not next week, but the week after, we have a big guest.
Big guest.
Huge. Big deal. Her name is Celia Hodent. I think I said that right. Celia Hodent?
Anthony is
I fucked this up.
master
I'm
at
so sorry.
mispronouncing people's names, so I haven't heard her pronounce her name yet, so I'll do that to make sure that we have the right pronunciation.
Celia Hodent used to be the director of UX at Epic Games on a little game that no one has ever heard of called Fortnite.
Right.
And
literally the director of the user experience on Fortnite. Like, I don't know if you understand what that means, but that's
prior to that, she held leadership positions in the UX department for games like Rainbow Six and Assassin's Creed at Ubisoft, along with other titles. It is going to be insanely interesting.
Yeah.
UX is just fascinating from a human psychology and all that kind of stuff perspective.
And she said she's really interested in discussing UX, so we'll probably have a cool discussion about it. We may even talk about some of the UX things we've done for our game, which we haven't talked about in detail publicly almost ever, and we'll probably talk about some of it there. So,
yep, she's actually planning on asking us some questions. So if you want to watch us get embarrassed live, be here on the 13th, Monday, 8:30 p.m. Eastern. It's going to be a good one.
Yep. Thanks, everyone, for listening, and we'll talk to you later.
Oh, and I'm sorry. Last one.
Just kidding.
Consider supporting Joe.
Get Song of Iron tomorrow.
Get Song of Iron tomorrow. Joe, who came on the podcast last week. Song of Iron's going live tomorrow. Reviews are actually looking pretty good so far.
Sweet.
And solo dev, worked on it by himself. Help support Joe. Song of Iron, Steam and Xbox. We'll see ya.
Bye-bye.